I'm Doug MacKenze.
And I'm John Ward.
And we're the co-hosts of the ABCs of IBC podcast.
Come join us as we share our unique perspective on the infinite banking concept as the creator, Nelson Nash, intended.
Back, everybody. Happy September.
September. What? That's
I know.
Crazy.
It is wild.
Yeah.
But here we are in September. How you doing, John?
I'm really good, and I'm really excited about this episode.
Yeah, I know. We were talking about this for a while before, and let me tell you guys, he is excited about this one.
Yeah. It's one of those, like, I don't know, it's not as funny as Seinfeld, but it's one of those kind of how things tie all together, and yeah, just interesting. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll let you kick this one off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the places to start is where we hear from people saying it sounds either too good to be true or,
why haven't I heard of this before?
Yeah,
that's a big one.
Yeah, why haven't I heard of it? Why isn't everybody doing it?
Why isn't everybody doing this?
Yeah, so I was driving yesterday for quite some time, and so I was listening to some interesting subject matters, or at least interesting for me. And there's a gentleman named Dr. Bruce Lipton, wrote a book called The Biology of Belief. He's written other books too, but he's a biologist by education and practice. And he at one time was working in the lab and put human cells in different petri dishes, and then he created what is called a culture for each one, but it was a different culture, which is basically feeding it. Let's just say, like in the body, there's chemicals, right, that run through our system, which our brain, says, hey, like when you get scared and you feel that jolt through your body, that's like the brain has like said, okay, kick out all this culture, all these chemicals, and you're going to end up having a different reaction, so there's different makeups, right? Which could be excitement, like I'm so happy, I'm at Fenway Park and they just hit a home run and wow, everybody's great. So that's a different feeling, right? So there's different cultures that run through our body, right? And so he put different cultures in each dish of human cells. And he realized that, well, we're able to grow, muscle, bones, like we can do whatever because we've told it what it should do. So we're basically turning on these cells. So they're just like a plain cell.
Like a stem cell.
Yeah, that's exactly. You're smart. That's just, you took the words right out of my mouth, right? Which is just, hey, whatever we need it to be, right?
Right, yeah.
And so that's when he realized that, well, there's something above genetics, which is epigenetics, right? Which is epi, like epidermis, it's above the skin, kind of, there's a layer, right? And this is above genetics, and we have this idea that, hey, I'm predisposed, the medical community is so predisposed to a particular cancer, for example, right? It runs in your family. Well, yeah, but there's stories about people that were adopted into families who end up with the same kind of disease. So it's more the environment. And the reason I'm bringing all this up is because Nelson Nash talks about...
Who?
Becoming Your Own Banker author talks about controlling the environment.
Yeah, he does.
And when does he talk about that? When does he get into the environment? He starts talking about it with flying a plane.
Yeah, and very early on in the book.
Yeah, so interesting, the word imagination he uses in the book too. And I think he used his imagination to try to explain how to become your own banker, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, Well, without really spoiling the book, we'll just say that if you've flown from the East Coast of the United States to California to the West Coast, you know that it takes you about 6 hours to get there.
Yep.
But when you fly back to the East Coast from the West Coast, it takes you about 4.5 hours. I mean, that's the flight time, right? We don't know what happens in the airport and then on the tarmac and all that kind of stuff. And it's because there's a headwind heading from the east to the west, which when you've ever walked in, a heavy wind, and you can literally say, I'm going to turn around and put my back to this because this is blowing so hard in my face.
I was up at a lake not long ago, right? And we were kayaking, and there was one direction into the wind and one direction that was back. And it was very apparent. I mean, I had to work like twice as hard to move about half as fast going into the wind.
Wow. That's a great one. Yeah. So, so some of us have had these personal experiences, and we know what a headwind feels like. And, if you switch that around to a tailwind, so it's pushing you, right? Can you control that environment? Yeah, you can control that. You can say, well, I'm not going out right now, or I'm not going that direction, I'm going this direction. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about setting up the environment, which then gives you different results, right? We're not saying that it isn't true that, the way the financial system works, yeah, that's the way it works. But it's by design, it's set up to have a headwind for us. And we can control some of that ourselves, and becoming our own banker is the way to do it.
Yeah. I mean, He talks about basically setting up a perpetual tailwind by implementing a system like this. But John, I'd like to hear you talk more about kind of this idea, because you were telling me about it beforehand, of kind of how that ingrained programming gets set in over our lifetime, because that was I also had that experience of, when I learned about this, I was like, and we've talked about this a bunch of times, I was thinking to myself, more people would be doing it. Why isn't everyone doing it? This is too good to be true. There has to be some catch. There's got to be something wrong with it. And it is very uncomfortable sometimes to go against the grain. And it also screamed against every bit of financial advice or financial truism that I had ever heard. So maybe you could speak a little bit as to kind of how we get these ideas ingrained and how that happens, and why it can be so hard to overcome.
Sure. Well, I'll try to articulate what I've learned about this, which is, the first 7 years of our life, right? We're basically recording everything. We're almost in a hypnotic state. We're in theta. And
what's theta?
Theta is just a level of consciousness and brain waves.
Yeah.
And so we reach that place. I'm told just before you fall asleep at night. When you start to feel yourself falling asleep, and literally what you're thinking of, or, if you're listening to something, you can record that. So we started out by recording in our childhood, and there's much of that we don't remember, but it has played out in our lives in the background, because it is a program. If you were told that you could do anything you ever wanted to do, you could become whatever you wanted to, your tendency is to start, you will believe that, right? If you've been told that you're not really worthy, then that program will play in the background. Now, can we override this? We can we certainly can. But it takes the conscious mind, which is the thinking mind, and it's the creative mind, right? And then the subconscious is the habitual program that keeps playing over and over. So we need to change our habits. We have to change and repeat it and practice it.
So like reprogram.
Yeah, practice it over and over. And like Bruce in this interview talks about when we first learn how to drive a car, right? We get maybe a little worked up, like I'm going to drive a car for the first time. And I got mirrors and I've got windows and I've got controls and I've got things for my feet and things for my hands and
Got to look here, got to look there.
Yeah, and then now, after you've been driving and practicing driving for a period of time, we just get in the car and we just need to know where we go. And sometimes we end up in places that, like, how did I even get here? How did
I just zoned out for a couple hours.
Yeah, and it was because you started up this program in this huge computer we have called a brain, and it just got us there, right? Because we just set our intention that we're going to go to grandma's house, and somehow an hour later we end up at grandma's house, and we were listening to music, we were doing whatever, we're having a conversation with people in the car, and we show up. And so we can think with our brain that I want to look into a subject matter, and if I'm interested, I'm going to keep looking into it, which is what you and I do, even with something that we are helping people implement in their lives. We keep studying it partly because it's our profession, but we enjoy it. And so, but we're continually learning, and we have to revisit it because we didn't live this way our whole lives either.
No, not even for the majority of our lives.
The majority, of my 60 years plus, I was programmed a different way. So even I have to go back and just, see the little nuances of this whole idea of doing something slightly different, but it's a big shift, even though I don't have to shift degrees wise. I don't have to shift a lot, but it's different. But it made sense to me, right? And that's why I wanted to help other people, because I felt that shift was startling. It was so amazing, the difference it would make.
Yeah. And
right?
it requires someone though to make a decision to examine something they may have always taken for granted, which is really difficult to do.
Yeah.
I liked your example of the car, by the way, and it brought up the memory of when I first drove a car, and in New Hampshire, you don't need a learner's permit. So my dad just drove me to this church when I was 15 and a half, and he told me to drive around the parking lot a few times. It was like probably 2 miles from our house, and then he said, "All right, drive home." And I said, "What?"
Yeah.
But I did it. And I remember, I still remember the feeling of, steering and braking. And, it was really weird to have this vehicle responding to things I was doing. And now it's like nothing. It's what I do all the time. Don't think about it. It's a great example. And I was thinking too about, you're saying that we're basically very impressionable in our first 7 years. And I have a 4-year-old son. And my wife and I try to be cognizant of that all the time, because he picks up on everything that we spit out, including how we feel about money and finances. I mean, we're talking about, this is important on a global scale, but specifically pertaining to what John and I typically talk about, those ideas of how money should work or how people relate to money and things like that also get ingrained at a very early age. And he asks me lots of questions about money. which, by the way, is a very difficult subject to try to explain to a 4-year-old. He does not really understand why, he's like, well, I just want that thing. Why can't I have it? But
Right.
I had very ingrained ideas by the time I figured out IBC. I thought there was one right way to do things. It was the way that everybody else did things. It was the way that I saw my parents do things. It was the way that I saw my friends do things. But you know what was interesting? I had never objectively sat down and thought, does this make sense? Which I've since realized that there are a lot of aspects of my life that I haven't done that about. And kind of getting into this requires someone to take a step back and say, yeah, let me just kind of like pop out of this repetitive, non-thinking thing that I've been doing and really take a look to see, does this serve me? Does it make sense? Does it align with what I want? Does it align with my goals? Do I even know what I'm doing? Or am I just doing it because everybody else does it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it's impossible to get people to do that.
Well, it made me think that, we talk, well, one of the ways is that you can be hypnotized. And I feel like...
Have you ever done that?
No.
Me neither.
No, but I have observed something that I'll mention in a second. But this idea that we do kind of walk through life in a lot of ways because we have all these programs, just like computer programs or apps, right? That they just turn on and we just do, and we don't really think, right? So we're kind of hypnotized in a way, right? And boy, if somebody told you you walk around like you're hypnotized all the time, it probably wouldn't be a compliment, right? It wouldn't make you feel like, oh, no, I'm a smart person. I'm a thinker.
Yeah.
I'm interested in different things. But so many times these programs get kicked off and they just start running and we don't even...
Well, I don't think most people could probably tell you what they did last Wednesday versus last Tuesday.
Yeah, I have trouble with weekends. Like, what'd you do this weekend?
Yeah. I mean, but for a lot of people, they get up, they go to work, they come home, they do something for a few hours, they have dinner, they go to... And it's not like it's just this very repetitive thing, which, again, I don't want to get too off track with this, but it is really pertinent when we're talking about, setting up your own banking financial system. Because you actually can, and again, if you haven't read Becoming Your Own Banker, you should read the book. But he does a great job of explaining this with the example of headwinds versus tailwinds and being able to set up a perpetual tailwind.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever been worse off by having access to liquid capital that's always growing.
Yeah.
And when you can ensure that you've captured dollars that you've earned and retain them for the rest of your life by being able to use them and then securing a legacy via death benefit, you're setting yourself up for success in a way that really no other financial plan can do that I'm aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll quickly tell the story about watching. So I went to a fundraiser.
Oh, yeah. I want to hear this.
I went to a fundraiser, and I think there was probably like 20 people that got called up to the stage.
Okay.
Like people pointing out, like, oh, can I have some volunteers? So this fundraiser had a hypnotist there. And he brings these people up to the stage, and he walks them through some different things, and by golly, there was probably at least half a dozen people that literally got hypnotized. I watched a guy that supposedly doesn't know how to speak Japanese, speak Japanese.
Huh.
Yeah. I watched a woman who was put on a train or a subway car, and I forget which way he did it first, but he said, it just is super cold in here. And she started to shake. She was holding herself, holding her hands on her shoulders or arms, and she was just bent over and she was shaking. And then he said, it's super hot in here. and she literally was like wiping like sweat off of her body. And so are some of us a little bit more available to being hypnotized? I don't know, right? But the idea is that we want to take this brain and think, and then we can affect not only how we feel, right? Because of the thoughts that we have, is that we can do the same thing of thinking and saying, oh yeah, I am giving away so much control of my money, right? I'm giving the money away. I never use it again. And there is a way for me to take back control. And it's because of the system that I've put into play, which is becoming your own banker through a whole life policy. I've changed the environment, right?
Yep.
It's not about just the cells in the thinking, but I've literally created a new paradigm. I've created a new system in my own brain, which then if I practice it, right, which is what I say to some people when they're a prospect and they're trying to understand this. And I say, the one thing I can't do for you is I can't get you to live it.
Right. You could set up the policy. You can explain how to pay premium, how policy loans work, how this works, that works. But right.
There's nothing like living it.
Right.
Being in that environment.
Yep.
And then you practice it. And I'm not saying you should do it and just practice it. I mean, that you should hopefully understand why you're doing this. You're thinking it through, but you're using your creative mind and say, I'm already using all these dollars, right? And where are they going? They're going somewhere else. Well, what if I could recapture those? And then you practice that and go, wow, okay, that wasn't so hard. And now it's just a way of life, right?
Yeah.
So if we're going to have habits, pick the habits you're going to have.
Yeah. And an insurance contract is a nice way to enforce some good habits too. I mean, It really is. It's a nice forced savings plan, but then, it does take, like you talked about, creativity to kind of understand how you can use that. And it takes a little while too to become comfortable with what you have. It is a weird thing where you're like, I have all this money now that I've saved and I can use it.
Yeah.
It's because you can't do that with other quote unquote savings vehicles. It's then gone.
Yeah.
Right. Or it's locked up for a long time. So it does take a little bit of time. It's a little bit weird at first.
Yeah.
And when you do it a few times, you realize, wow, this is really easy. This is pretty neat. And it becomes pretty reinforcing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before. I actually quite enjoy making premium payments.
Yeah. No,
which is an odd shift, I guess, right? I don't think I've took the same kind of joy in putting money in a savings account at a bank. I mean, I know I didn't.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I had a client recently. He was taking some loans because of his cash flow. He's a business owner, and a couple, jobs that he thought he was going to get got canceled.
Yep.
So, he still had some outstanding accounts receivable that would have paid for it, but the timing wasn't right, and he needed to borrow the money to pay for his premium. So he had to borrow from the insurance company so that he could pay his insurance premium. And so he said it wasn't really even about, profitability with the cash flow that didn't come through, right? They weren't really big profitable projects, but it was a cash flow thing. And so to have another place to go and grab cash flow from, right? And then when these other accounts receivable will come in, then he just pays off the loan. So it's just timing.
Yep.
And to have that flexibility in your life because you took this action of building your own banking system. If you hadn't, granted, he wouldn't have the premium to pay, but he wouldn't have the money. He wouldn't have money for anything. And he said a bunch of his equipment, some of it's old, but a whole bunch of it broke down this year, and he's going to have to replace it. Well, if he had been just paying cash or whatever,
gone.
That, or even financing it and then paying cash to pay off the financing, gone. Right?
Yeah, we should do an episode about how powerful these can be for business owners.
Yeah, and I think everybody's a business owner. That's the way I look at it. You're running your own business life. Yeah. Your life is,
but they can be incredibly powerful in mitigating, unknown cash flows and things like that, and just providing a really nice security blanket for especially small business owners.
Yeah. Well, I hope this was helpful to people. I had fun talking about it.
Yeah, me too.
And please reach out if you have questions. And the Biology of Belief with Dr. Bruce Lipton. I love him.
That's the name of the book.
That's the name of one of his books. I'd look him up. He's very insightful. And I've listened to him a lot, and I enjoy it quite a bit. And I think everybody that listens to us would enjoy it too.
Thanks for sharing, John.
Okay, my pleasure. All right, Doug.
Have a good week, everybody.
Another wrap.
Another wrap. That's a wrap.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Have a good one.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the ABCs of IBC.
If you enjoyed listening, please hit subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen. It really helps. See you next week.
Bye.